experts like Dr. Raywat Deonandan, epidemiologist, associate professor, Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Ottawa. Dr. Deonandan, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Hey, you're just following up a conversation we had about employers demanding employees be fully vaccinated. So just so you know, the text line is still pretty hot. So this may just follow into it. But, for 16 months, Raywat, you've been at the front of this. You know that people are very divided when it comes to, A, whether this is real, and then the vaccines, whether or not I should be vaccinated. So what concerns me is when we hear the WHO this week, as in the World Health Organization, warning against mixing and matching COVID vaccines, I think, oh no, here goes another message that people who are opposed to the vaccines will jump on. What were your thoughts?
Well, I've had my own issues with WHO messaging for a while as well, but I will say I've consulted for them. I have a lot of faith in them in general. They do excellent technical work around the world, and they're a critical voice, especially for low-income countries that have no other leadership on this front. So when I heard the statement that we're talking about, I rolled my eyes and thought, oh, here we go again. I know where this is coming from. It's an overworked scientist, a microphone stuck in her face who just kind of slipped up. That's actually not what happened, though. What happened was, in this case, it was a reporter who just miscommunicated the context. So Dr. Swaminathan wasn't talking about mixing and matching vaccines the way that Canada does. She was talking about this theoretical third dose that some countries are exploring. So Pfizer, as I think people know, is exploring in the USA about getting authorization to offer a third booster dose because they perceive that in some cases immunity is waning. And in some countries now, people who have had 2 doses, like 2 doses of the Chinese vaccine or the Russian vaccine, are looking for additional immunity and in their own recognizance are shopping around for another vaccine to top up their immunity. So Dr. Swaminathan of the WHO is essentially saying, don't do that. Don't go shopping around for another vaccine without public health giving you guidance. That's all she's saying. But this got misinterpreted as saying, don't mix and match vaccines. So what we do here in Canada, the mix and match, meaning if you had Pfizer, you can get Moderna. If you had Moderna, you can get Pfizer. If you had AstraZeneca, you can get either Pfizer or Moderna. That has some pretty good evidence behind it, especially mixing AstraZeneca with Pfizer. There are 3 strong studies out of the UK, Germany, and Spain showing not only is it effective, it's very safe, it might even be better than sticking to just one vaccine. And in terms of mixing Pfizer and Moderna, we've been doing this for a while now. We see no safety signals, and there's every scientific reason to expect that to be just as good, again, if not better, than sticking to a same-dose regimen. So the science is pretty standard here, and the communication just got filtered through a wrong lens, and people took it the wrong way.
So that whole idea of, fine, if you've had your 2 doses, and she was even saying once it comes to if there's a booster, there is a concern. I mean, I know the quote was, it's a little bit of a dangerous trend here. So is she even saying, if we need boosters in a year and a half, 2 years, should we be making sure that it's the last one we had, whether it was Moderna or Pfizer or AstraZeneca?
First of all, when she's saying it's a dangerous trend, I don't think she's talking about danger to the body of getting this other vaccine. I think it's danger to the overall pandemic response. If people are looking at getting a 3rd dose before the rest of the world gets a 1st dose, that's a dangerous trend in terms of stopping the pandemic early. That's what she's talking about, I think. But to answer your question, will our 3rd dose, if we get a 3rd dose, should it be the same brand? Not necessarily. In fact, there's very good reason to expect it not to be the same dose. If you get your flu vaccine every year, do you know who the manufacturer of your flu vaccine is? I don't. We just, we assume it's good enough, and it usually is. And the reason for that is all the COVID vaccines work in pretty much the same way. They show your body the spike protein, which is that molecule on the surface of the virus. They differ in how they show it to you. So the AstraZeneca delivers it on the back of another virus. The Pfizer and Moderna convince your body to make it, but both of them show your body the spike protein. Now, different vaccines show you a different angle of the spike protein a little bit, different perspective. That gives your body a more wide spectrum kind of immunity, a more robust kind of immunity. So in many ways, it makes sense to get a different manufacturer to get the best quality of immunity. So in Canada, if we get a 3rd booster, and we might not, it might not be necessary, We might get it from the same manufacturers. We might get it from one of the new ones like Novavax or Medicago, which are coming down the pipeline. And they might be modified for the new variants, in which case our immunity gets supercharged. So all of that is good news. And if a booster is offered, we should celebrate the fact that we have a booster to be offered and that we have a solution to the growing problem of variants. So there's nothing bad that I'm hearing around this. The only bad part is the confusion that it's causing and the distrust in the Canadian strategy, which is a very good strategy.
Yeah, I know, and that's for sure. And while I've got you on the line here, just because I always get these same texts, and I always think, oh, this is something I should have asked Raywat. It still is a big concern about these vaccines haven't received full approval. They've received approval for emergency use. Can you understand people's concern about that, and why are they not fully approved?
Right. So in the USA, they've received emergency use authorization because it takes a longer time to get full approval. And there's a lot of criteria for emergency use authorization, like there has to be a crisis, there can be no alternatives, etc. In Canada, they are fully approved. We don't have the emergency use authorization lever. So the data has gone through Health Canada using the same procedures they would have used in any other situation. They just accelerated it using this interim order thing. I forgot what the law is called, but it's fully approved in Canada. So this accusation that it's an experimental vaccine is not true here and in other countries. So put that aside right now. And by the way, the USA is probably going to make it fully approved soon anyway, just to get rid of this this problem hanging over their heads.
Right. Okay, because I'm going to get texts when people send me the screenshot, so I'm quickly going on the government website. But you're saying fully approved. It's not still just used for emergency uses. All right. The other one. People often say, I want to wait. I want to see what happens. There hasn't been enough long-term studies on the effects of these vaccines. What do you say to people when they say that?
I mean, I understand that. And to a certain extent, it is true. They haven't been around for decades. They've been around for months and possibly years, depending upon how you look at it. So the vaccines have been in development for over a year. They've been in circulation in somebody for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And before that, they were in animal models. They weren't just dreamt up last year. People have been working on this for years. So we've had some version of mRNA vaccines for a while. So the people who were first given the phase 1 trial doses like almost 2 years ago are fine today. We have that data. And another way to look at it is absent long-term linear studies, we have a whole lot of people getting it now. So we have hundreds of millions of people around the world with these vaccines over 6 months now, in some cases over a year, and nothing bad has happened. But they're not wrong. Like if your idea of a long-term safety study is 10 years, well, I can't give that to you. I can't guarantee that in 10 years you won't grow another head. But it's highly unlikely because we haven't seen it in the animals, and there's nothing in the science that suggests something bad like that would happen.
What are your thoughts on vaccine passports?
Well, first of all, for international travel, they're a no-brainer.
Yeah.
We've had that for a while. For domestic usage, they are useful. But I understand the resistance. I'm a non-white immigrant, and I don't like the idea of being stopped on the street asking for my papers. That's a bit authoritarian. But that's not what this is. What a domestic vaccine passport would look like is if you go to a restaurant or a gym or something, you show a card or your cell phone that has a QR code, and the vendor links that QR code to a central database that tells them your vaccination status. It tells them, A, have you been vaccinated? Or B, have you had COVID and recovered? Or C, have you had a recent negative test? And if any one of those things is true, you're allowed inside. And if they're not true, then another accommodation is made for you. Like if it's a restaurant, you got to sit outside. So I don't object to this for two reasons. One is we're not denying people's service. We're saying that if you didn't get vaccinated or have one of the other things, you have to walk through a couple of extra steps to get service. You have to show proof of a negative swab test, for example. And the other reason I'm not opposed to it is that evidence from around the world, like Israel, is that this is only in place for a little while, and then it falls by the wayside as things go back to normal. In Israel, for example, they enforced it heavily for a few weeks, then they enforced it unofficially, and then they stopped using it entirely. So I don't see this as the creep of authoritarianism as some people do. But it's a rapid way to open things up quickly and get things back to normal faster.
So that's the domestic, and we know here in Alberta, Premier Kenney has said no to a domestic passport. Prime Minister Trudeau, though, is saying definitely they're looking at a vaccine passport for international travel. The question has been put, though, what if I am mixed dosed, I'm AstraZeneca and I'm Moderna? What about a country that doesn't recognize one of those vaccines? Or in reverse that, Canada doesn't recognize some of the vaccines that have been given in the U.S. that Canadians have received. How do you get around that?
Well, first, we have no control over other countries' policies. That's a matter for governments to negotiate. I'd be more concerned about what happens here and how we keep ourselves safe. Second is that when it comes to other people coming here, that is an ongoing issue. Right now, the ethics argument is that we should accept any vaccine that the WHO has authorized. And that includes the Chinese vaccine and the Russian vaccine. That doesn't really rub me the right way entirely because I have some efficacy issues with some of these non-approved vaccines, unapproved in Canada. One way to get around it is if you want to come here with one of these other vaccines, you're allowed in, but in that first week, you got to accept one of our vaccines, right? Or you've got to double mask everything you do, or you got to have proof of a negative swab test when you arrive. Any one of those things is probably good enough. So there are workarounds to allow incoming people to partake of the glories that is Canada. For us going abroad, again, we can't control what other countries do, but if people are concerned that a mixed dose, like an AstraZeneca plus Pfizer, wouldn't be recognized by, say, the USA that only has Pfizer and Moderna, well, the way that many provinces are doing it is on your vaccine record, they only show the last vaccine that you got. So if you got AstraZeneca first and Pfizer second, then you're seen as a Pfizer recipient, with the caveat that you were also fully vaccinated. So 2 check marks. What was the last vaccine you got? And are you fully vaccinated, yes or no? And that's good enough for travel usually. And by the way, I don't think the USA will be banning AstraZeneca people because then they're banning much of Europe from coming in as well. And no one wants to do that. So this will be worked out.
With the big donation announced yesterday with our procurement minister, Anand, to COVAX of AstraZeneca, remind me, Dr. Deonandan, where are we with AstraZeneca? Is it because everyone was so concerned about the blood clots or the capillary leakage that basically AstraZeneca no one wants, and so they're giving it into the COVAX system?
That's pretty much it, I think. And it's not unreasonable. We have an alternative. That alternative is the mRNA vaccines, which Canadians seem to want more and seems to work a little better against the Delta variant. So it makes sense. We tolerate it better. But there are parts of the world that don't have that alternative. And so this very good vaccine, AstraZeneca, is certainly better than no vaccine. And again, it is a very good vaccine, and it's better tolerated in warm weather countries where shipping is a problem, where storage is a problem. So what the ideal vaccine will differ depending upon where you are in the world and the nature of the epidemic where you are. So AstraZeneca will do remarkable good in places like India and Brazil, and I hope it gets there fast.
Well, then I'm glad to hear that because I sort of thought, well, aren't we giving them sort of our cast-offs? Well, we don't really want AstraZeneca. We'll give it to COVAX. But, yeah, it still is a good vaccine. It was my first. I would have gladly stepped up for it as my second, but I know exactly how people are feeling about that versus the mRNA. Dr. Deonandan, as always, thanks so much for answering all the questions for us.
It is my pleasure.
Dr. Raywat